Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy Chair. I rise today to speak in opposition of this legislation that is, if it was to pass, would take our country backwards. It was only just over 2 years ago that it was with great honour that I and many of my colleagues here in this place were able to vote in support of real action on climate change. And that came after massive discussion and debate amongst the Australian population and community. People who desperately wanted, after years of being ignored, to see Australia grapple with the fact that we needed to take action on climate change and we needed legislation in our parliament to help deliver and drive that change. That day, Madam Acting Deputy President, Australia became a world leader. Today, of course, we are here debating the repeal of that legislation. We are at risk of being taken backwards by a government that refuses to recognise the threat of global warming. And it saddens me to stand here and have to defend the only laws that this country has to reduce the devastating effects of global warming. The evidence has now become even clearer. Hundreds of climate scientists are telling us that climate change is becoming more severe, that humans are causing it and that we can expect more dangerous summers and weather events in our future if we don't act now. This summer alone has been even further evidence that we are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. Bushfires, floods, extreme weather events, extreme days of heat, the health impacts of all of those, the loss of family homes, the impact on our agricultural industries, all of those are directly impacted by the drying effects of climate change, the impact it has on our weather patterns, and the impact then, of course, that it has on our broader community. This government is taking us backwards with this legislation, rather than being visionary and seeing what we can be doing for the future to secure industries that are going to need to adapt to a changing climate, to investing in clean renewable energy production that we know we need in order to power our homes, our businesses, our cities, our towns, our industries into the future. This government is taking us backwards by abolishing the Climate Commission, cutting the Climate Department, and now trying to dismantle the price on pollution. And if we allow Tony Abbott to come in with his wrecking ball over all of these things, what has Australia got left? Not much. We know that the opposition's plans for direct action amount to virtually nothing when it comes to having a significant reduction on the impacts of climate change. We indeed would be the first country, Madam Acting Deputy President, in the world to dismantle a carbon market that is already reducing emissions. And we know that the next thing on Tony Abbott's list, of course, when he brings in his wrecking ball, is the renewable energy target. That is on Tony Abbott's next hit list. And of course, that is going to decimate the renewable energy sector in Australia, in particular in my home state in South Australia. And this is all happening at a time when we are already seeing the results of living in a warmer, wetter world. The severity of extreme climate events is increasing, and in Australia that is having already a devastating result. Nature has given us a reality check, and we need strong action on climate change, and it is urgent. As leaders in this country, we must respond. As a mother, it is my duty to prepare my daughter for the future. And I will not sit idly by while this government turns protecting her future into a political football. We do need to be talking about the impacts of our decisions in years to come, not just in the next election cycle, not just the next news cycle, not just even whether who will be the next leader of the Liberal Party or indeed the Labor Party. It is about protecting the futures of the next generation and working to protect our children's future. Putting our heads in the sand, as Tony Abbott would prefer, and ignoring the science...
Senator, you need to refer to those in the other place by the correct title.
Putting our heads in the sand, as Mr Abbott, the Prime Minister, would prefer, and ignoring the science won't help protect our children's future. We owe it to the next generation to stand up, to raise our voice and to fight for the action, not just that we need to continue, but that we've already put in place. We know that young people in particular across this country are desperate for real action on climate change. In fact, when you look at the attitudes of voters and attitudes of citizens in this country, overwhelmingly, the largest amount of support for direct action, urgent action, action that will reduce emissions for climate change is amongst Australia's youngest citizens. And why is that? Well, I guess it's because it is their future that we are talking about. We must always be thinking of our younger citizens when we make decisions in this place. This legislation reduces and takes away the responsibility for those who pollute the most to have to contribute to the cleaning up of our energy industry. Tony Abbott would prefer to use taxpayer money to pay the polluters.
Senator,
Mr. Abbott would prefer to use taxpayer money to pay the polluters rather than making the country's biggest polluters contribute to the schemes and ability for us to tackle climate change. This is, of course, a market mechanism, and it is astounding to be standing here and to hear the negativity and the opposition from the government and government members to using the market as a way of being able to reduce climate change, to reduce emissions and to drive the change we need in order to have us heading towards a clean energy future, a sustainable future where industry can rely upon energy production that is clean, that is green and that will be there into the future. As we know, Australia is rich in natural resources, but we've been exploiting our mineral reserves for more than a century now. The good news is that in my home state in South Australia, we have a plentiful supply of alternative natural resources that we can call upon, whether they be solar, wind, or even geothermal. South Australia is perfectly poised to make hay while the sun shines. And when it comes to renewable energy alternatives, the economic sun is certainly breaking through the clouds in South Australia. While our nation as a whole is committed to reaching a target of 20% baseload power generation from renewable sources by 2020, South Australia in 2014 has already achieved better than that with an over 21% renewable power supply. The advantages of wind power are all well understood in our home state of South Australia. Despite our size, we produce almost half the nation's wind power capacity already. And yet Mr. Abbott, the Prime Minister, wants to tear all of that down and come in with his wrecking ball. I would like to just reference some words from a young woman in my home state in South Australia, Genevieve. And she says, as a young Australian facing a future of climate change, it pains me to see the leaders of our world, and especially my home country, acting in such a cowardly manner towards the biggest threats in our history. We need strong affirmative action right now, and we need it to come from those that have chosen to be our representatives. We need our leaders to do what they have been chosen to do. We need our leaders to be courageous and to stand up and to lead. When it comes to young people in South Australia, they are the ones who are driving our state. They are the ones investing in renewable energy. They are the entrepreneurs that are going to drive our sustainable industry into the future. It is that drive, that vision, that desire for a clean energy future that will provide jobs, that will ensure that the planet and the environment is protected for our next generation, that we must be drawing upon when we think about the legislation before us today. The legislation here today is incredibly short-sighted. It dismisses not just the science, it dismisses the fact that we are already seeing the devastating impacts on our communities, particularly in our agricultural areas. It is dismissive of the fact that the rest of the world is trying their hardest as to how we work together as a global community to confront global warming and to tackle the dramatic rise in emissions over the last 50 years. And yet here we have, in Australia, our Prime Minister with his head stuck in the sand, wanting to say, all right, Australia is not going to participate in any of this future driving in relation to energy production and tackling climate change. It is not just disappointing, but it is extremely embarrassing to see Australia trotting around on the global stage through the Abbott government's ministers, pretending that we have nothing we need to worry about when it comes to global warming and climate change. Well, here on this side of the chamber, we know that the long-term cost of inaction is far too great. My Greens colleagues and I understand that we understand the urgency for action, and we will defend Australia's clean energy legislation at every opportunity. Sometimes I wonder in this place if we had more young people putting forward their views, having their voices heard, whether we would get more insight into what type of country the next generation really would like us to become. Going backwards is not the option that young people across this country want us to take.